you've got to put in place not only manage the technical risks, but you've absolutely got to manage the security, geopolitical, and other interrelated risks. And I can't see how American miners are going to start mining rare metals while there's a war raging.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And today we are talking to the former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Sir Richard Shirreff. General Shirreff spent 37 years in the British Army. He's commanded troops on operations at every level and co-founded the global risk advisory company Strategia Worldwide. He's also the author of War with Russia. Richard, good to see you again. Welcome back to Frontline.
Thank you, Kate.
What does the signing of the minerals deal with the US mean, do you think, for US commitment to Ukraine, to securing a ceasefire deal, and importantly, one that's acceptable to Ukraine?
Well, the first thing is, I can't see how Trump is going to get any minerals out of it, because mining is a complex, slow business. Sure, the minerals may be in the ground, but they've got to be extracted, they've got to be mined, and as anybody in the mining industry knows, you've got to manage the risks. And you've got to put in place not only manage the technical risks, but you've absolutely got to manage the security, geopolitical, and other interrelated risks. And I can't see how American miners are going to start mining rare metals while there's a war raging. So that's the first point. Does it? I mean, as we heard in the deal, there's no clear, there are no security guarantees tied up with it. It looks as if it means the continued provision of American military aid, which is good news. And at least we heard the US Treasury Secretary talking about the objective being a Ukraine that's free and sovereign. So that's good. Those are positives. But the fact is that the Trump capitulation deal, as I call it, is still hanging over Ukraine. And the fact is that there's no indication yet of any proper strategy being put in place to stop and make Putin realize that he's never going to get Ukraine. So I think all things remain open.
You say that you can't see any minerals being mined while there's a war going on. What impact do you think it will have on Trump's determination to get a ceasefire, no matter what it is, done as quickly as possible? Might it actually make him even more impatient?
I think it's exactly that. I think he's going to try and force that deal down Zelensky's throat. But of course, the other point is that many of these minerals are going to be in Russian-occupied bits that Russia is currently occupying, or would seek to gain as a result of the capitulation deal. So how do American miners and technicians access those unless they're completely in cahoots with Russia? So that may be, I'm afraid, the ulterior motive.
Looking at some of the wording of the document, it actually says that it affirms that it is an expression of a broader long-term strategic alignment between their peoples and governments, and a tangible demonstration of the United States of America's support for Ukraine's security, prosperity, reconstruction, and integration into global economic framework. I mean, judging from what you've already said, do you not think that actually carries much weight, and will the Kremlin care too much about that?
Unless there's a clear intent to defeat Russia, support Ukraine to defeat Russia in Ukraine, and a clear intent to put in place cast iron security guarantees to ensure long-term Ukrainian independence and sovereignty, and the only one that matters, frankly, is NATO membership, I don't think it means a great deal.
And your recent assessment about ceasefire negotiations was about a week ago, was that they had hit the buffers, and that the US, if they threaten to walk away, they should simply do it, and Europe should take over. What do you think now?
Well, I still think the same applies. That if that the so-called ceasefire, the capitulation deal has hit the buffers, because I cannot see the Ukrainians accepting it. As for Europe taking over and stepping up to the mark, easy to say, but let's just look at the reality. Is Europe capable? Europe is capable. Is it willing? Has it got the political, will and determination and grit and patience and willingness to make the sacrifices necessary? I have my doubts.
And you also have your doubts, I think, whether it actually has a clear strategy on Ukraine and ending the war. What do you think that strategy should be?
Well, what we've had is a lot of platitudes spouting without any clear strategy. The strategy, in my view, strategy requires you start with a goal. Where do I want to get to? What is my destination? For my money, the destination should be a Europe whole, free, and secure against continued and the continued threat from Russia. Then you work back. How do you achieve? What are the objectives that need to be achieved before you can achieve that strategy? Well, number one is defeat of Russia in Ukraine. And number two is cast down security guarantees for Ukraine. And that means NATO membership, because that is the only security guarantee that really matters, Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. We've seen what happened with pieces of paper like the so-called Budapest Memorandum of 1994, when Britain, France, America signed up, and Russia signed up to guarantee Ukrainian sovereignty and security if they gave up nuclear weapons. It wasn't worth the paper it was written on when Russia invaded in 2014, and even less so when it continued its invasion in 2022. So, and then, of course, as well as all that, you've got to work through what sort of aid Ukraine needs, how that aid is going to be delivered, what needs to be done to European industrial bases in order to generate the capabilities needed, not only to build up Ukrainian capabilities, but also to fill the gaps left by what Europe has given to Ukraine, and indeed to build up even further to ensure that West European members of NATO have the means to deter Russia. So this is a massive undertaking, and thus far there's been absolutely no indication that anything like this is being done.
You have said again that Russia needs to be defeated in Ukraine, and you said that before. How likely is it? How is that possible?
Well, it's possible. I mean, how likely as it is right now, it's not likely. But it's a binary choice. Either Europe and Canada sit down and put together a strategy along the lines I've discussed, or we accept that ultimately Russia will prevail, because people need to understand Russia and Putin for what Russia is and what Putin is. Here is an imperialist. Here is a state that is fundamentally has empire woven into its DNA. It can only live and survive by expansion. That is the story of Russia. It expands, it overreaches itself, and then it collapses. And then the process starts all over again. And the only way Russia is going to be stopped is through effective deterrence, a stronger alliance from NATO that makes Russia realize it will never achieve its aims and has to learn to live within its own boundaries.
And in that, how effective do you think at the moment the so-called coalition of the willing is proving? A recent article by the Times defence correspondent Larissa Brown wrote about conversations between Europe's defence ministers and military leaders who've been challenged to put together a 64,000 strong force in the event of a peace deal. The conclusion, no chance. Several countries were even unable to provide any.
Well, I mean, I think it's frankly pathetic. I mean, if you aggregate the size of the armed forces of Europe and Canada, they come to, I don't know, do the maths. I haven't done the maths, but this is, tens of thousands. And yet it absolutely sums up the supine lack of political will in Europe to recognize the challenge that we face, the existential challenge that we face, and the lack of political balls, frankly, to do anything about it.
It also appears that Britain will abandon any plans, she writes, to send a reassurance force to Ukraine and would instead send a training force along with France. Do you think a reassurance force was ever a realistic option?
No, it wasn't. Until Russia has been defeated, stopped dead in its tracks, then it's not an act. It's simply not an act of war. And anyway, such a force would have to be capable of overmatching Russia and being genuinely prepared to fight Russia. Frankly, sending a reassurance force to guard a railway siding in Lviv is meaningless. Funnily enough, I think actually a training mission probably is exactly, that's much more in line with what is needed, which is to help the Ukrainians, as well as giving them the equipment and the ammunition and the logistics. Also, I think probably there's mileage in giving Ukraine helping Ukraine build the expertise needed. Now, Ukraine probably doesn't need many lessons from us, but because Ukraine's been fighting pretty impressively for 3 years now, they can teach us a heck of a lot of lessons. But there may be areas, command and control, how you develop higher formation operations, the operational art of war, command and control, and the linking of other things, which Britain and France probably may well be able to help with.
This week, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, reiterated Putin's rejections of the 30-day ceasefire. that Ukraine agreed to straight away. He claimed they require extensive monitoring. They don't think honest monitoring is possible during a 30-day ceasefire, and they have no interest, it would seem, from this. I mean, they just demonstrated again and again no interest in stopping the war right now, do they?
No, they don't. Until they're stopped, until they're brought to a stop, until they're forced to recognise that they can't go any further. They're not interested because they think they can get away with it. And what is happening, as always with Russia, is when they encounter weakness, they continue to push. They have encountered weakness. I mean, the Trump deal is a classic example of weakness because it's pandering to Putin and giving him what he wants. So how does he respond? He demands more, and he'll go on doing so until he's given a very sharp poke in the eye.
President Zelensky had said earlier this week that he had been in discussions with Washington about how to apply pressure on Putin to accept a ceasefire, or at least a cessation in the violence that's acceptable to the Ukrainians. Do you think that after what we saw at the Vatican, the sit down between Trump and Zelensky, and after we've seen this minerals deal signed, do you think that Trump may at last be ready to put more leverage on Russia to bring Putin to the negotiating table in a more honest way?
The only leverage Putin will understand, as I keep on going on about, is if he is given, if he is met with real force, and his forces are if he is brought to a grinding halt on the battlefield, if his missiles and drones are shot out of the sky by European aircraft, that's the only lesson, the only message that he will get. The only way you're going to stop him. If he is given a chance to take an inch, he will take a mile, and that's what's happening. So talking is no use here. He's got to be met by force, and that brings us back to the discussion about a properly thought through strategy to achieve Russian defeat in Ukraine. And until Trump gets behind such a strategy, then I'm afraid Putin will continue to push. And the chances of that happening are pretty remote.
At that point, then, crippling sanctions wouldn't work.
Oh, I think sanctions are absolutely part of it, absolutely part of it. But I would weave crippling sanctions. I would weave in sanctions. I would weave in a complete cessation of oil exports to Europe and to countries like India, which refine Russian oil and then sell it on to Europe for use in aeroplanes and cars and the like as diesel. No, absolutely. A strategy requires not just military, it requires economics, it requires a whole range of other lines of operation as well.
One of the many objections that the Kremlin has put to the current negotiations over the future status of Crimea and the 4 oblasts partially occupied by Russia at the moment. Do you think that President Zelensky does have to accept that they are at least temporarily lost, even irrespective of a ceasefire or not?
I don't think he does. Now, that's a matter for Ukraine. Of course it is. I would say, for example, that sending a message that it's okay for Russia to have Crimea and for it to be internationally recognized is appalling, because it's sending a message that it's okay to invade your neighbor. It's okay to level your neighbor's cities, to rape the women of that nation, and to massacre civilians and deport and kidnap children. And what sort of a world are we going to live in if that sort of thing is okay? It's simply not okay. And if it comes back to the point, give Russia an inch and they will continue to take a mile.
Yes, and meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Russia is expanding its military infrastructure along the border with Finland, stockpiling new tanks. President Zelensky has also warned of the risk of Russia using military exercises in Belarus as a cover to massively increase its troop presence there. How do you think Europe should be acting to deter any future aggression in this area?
It should be building up its in-place forces. It should be conducting regular exercises which require reinforcement from other NATO countries. I'm thinking back to the world. We're back to a world in a sense, of the reforger exercises of the Cold War, where on a regular basis, NATO rolled out its capability to defend the Central Front. And we need to learn lessons from that in a modern context. So it's about demonstrating strength, effective deterrence, and military capability. And of course, this brings us back, to the old saga about defense budgets.
Just throwing ahead now to the NATO summit in June, Russia's Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu told the Kremlin newswire TASS that Russia is updating its national security strategy to take into account the crisis, it calls it, of European security, the formation of a new global order, and the challenges the changing world presents to Russia. I mean, what response do you expect from the NATO summit in June when they evaluate their strategic direction?
Right. Well, NATO's got a few things to sort out. I mean, I think the first thing NATO's got to sort out is, are the Americans in or out? What is going on with America? Because everything we've heard from America, Trump and his henchmen, the likes of Hegseth and Vance, since the Munich Security Conference, is raising real questions about whether America can be trusted as an ally. Will America come to the aid of a NATO member if attacked? Has it undermined catastrophically the foundations of NATO Article 5 by its words and its actions? So I would think the first thing is to level with America. Are you in? Are you out? You're either in, you're out. You can't be half in, half out. You can't be half pregnant. So come on, what's going on here? And if the answer to that is no, we're not in, then Europe has got, and Canada have got to effectively Europeanize the NATO alliance. So this is a crucial summit. Is that likely to happen? I think it's highly unlikely to happen, because I think there is almost a sort of see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil attitude to all the noises coming out of Trump's America at the moment, because Western European leaders are terrified of getting the wrong answer. But at some stage, NATO has got to level with America and work out which direction America is going in. I think they'll still be hoping for some small fragment of a signal from Trump that, yeah, we're sort of in. That's not good enough, because ultimately this summit is about coming to grips with the issue for European security, which we've been discussing, which is the threat that Russia poses. Coming to grips with the issue of how do we achieve a Europe whole, free and secure from continued Russian aggression, and hence the need for the sort of strategy that we've been discussing.
So looking at the situation right now in terms of the ongoing stalled negotiations towards a cessation of violence in Ukraine, every day we're seeing continued attacks by Russia on civilians, on infrastructure, on the people, in spite of what they say about wanting peace. What do you think the likelihood there is of a cessation of the attacks in the near future?
I think it's highly unlikely. It's not going to happen. And it'll only happen if Russia is stopped, because the Russian way of war, the Russian way of negotiation, the Russian way of politics, and the Russian way of actually dealing with anybody, including its own people, is brutality, the exercise of raw power and terror. And that is what we're seeing. And the only way you stop that is by standing up to Russia. So what? Take missiles and drone attacks. This is the moment that Europe should step up and put in place the plans for an integrated air protection zone over central and western Ukraine with Sky Shield. It is entirely possible and with entirely manageable risk for European aircraft to get up in the skies over Ukraine, launched from outside Ukraine, to shoot down drones and other missiles being attacking Ukrainian cities. That would send a really strong message of strength to Russia. Don't mess with us. And it's that sort of thing that needs to be done. Talking isn't good enough.
Sir Richard Shirreff, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com.